After Guango was hospitalized with leukemia, his family learned that he was not their biological child. He had been switched at birth in the hospital. The expensive and seemingly endless hospital bills led to countless arguments between his parents outside his room. Gradually, they visited him less and less. Until one day, Guango found out that his parents had secretly started looking for their biological son. Today was the day when the Guan and Duan families would officially reunite. Guan Rua got out of the car and headed straight for the restaurant, but she was still half an hour late. Her parents' faces were dark with displeasure. They already felt guilty in front of the Duan family, and now being late to the first meeting made them feel even more ashamed. "Why are you so late?" her father asked grimly. "There was a traffic jam," Guan Rua replied cautiously. "A traffic jam?" her father said impatiently. "Couldn't you have left earlier? Do you have to wait until rush hour to make everyone wait for you, just to feel important?" "Old Guan, let it go," her mother whispered, tugging at his sleeve. Although Old Guan wanted to say more, he had to stop in front of the guests. But Guan Rua was already upset. She dropped the forced smile she had been wearing and sat down stiffly. Let me introduce everyone," her mother quickly interjected with a smile. "This is our daughter, Guan Rua. Guan Rua." She called her daughter's name sternly, signaling her to look at the three people across the table. Then her tone became warm and friendly again. "This is your aunt, and this is Duan Chang. He's 2 years older than you, so you should consider him your brother." Duan Chang's mother, who was sitting in a wheelchair, shifted uncomfortably but showed no emotion. From the moment the Guan family presented evidence that their babies had been switched at birth, along with Guan Ji's death certificate, she had maintained the same inscrutable expression, revealing nothing of her thoughts. Guan Rua rolled her eyes internally. Duan Chang, however, stood up. He smiled awkwardly and said, "Hello, I'm Duan Chang." He had a square face, broad cheekbones, thick eyebrows, and large eyes. His lips were full, and he was tall and muscular, making him look out of place in the cramped room. "Hello," Guan Rua muttered, bowing slightly. Her mother turned to Duan Wei, her gaze softening. "Guan Rua, this is your brother." Duan Wei had delicate features, clearly different from Duan Chang, but his body was weighed down by excess flesh. Guan Rua estimated that he was under 170 centimeters tall but weighed at least 200 pounds. His round body and arms took up so much space at the table that the others had to move to the sides. He was engrossed in a game on his phone, his pudgy fingers moving quickly, his eyes glued to the screen, oblivious to everything else around him. "Sigh, he's nothing like my Guango," thought Guan Rua sadly, her nose tingling with emotion. "Guan Rua, what are you daydreaming about? Hurry up and pour tea for your aunt and brother," her mother scolded, giving her a sharp look. The more her parents tried to please the Duan family, the more unworthy Guan Rua felt on behalf of Guango. She pretended not to hear, slowly wiping her hands with a wet towel. "Guan Rua," her father barked, his tone filled with anger. Duan Chan quickly said, "Uncle Guan, it's okay. This is the first time our families are meeting, so it's normal to feel a bit awkward. We'll get more comfortable over time." Guan Rua couldn't help but glance at Duan Chang. His mother was watching him as well. "Sister, your Duan Chang is really considerate," Guan Rua's mother said sincerely, then encouraged everyone to eat. She noticed that Duan Wei was going straight for the meat dishes, so she moved all the meat plates to his side. Duan Wei, without hesitation, devoured them, making loud chewing noises as if he hadn't eaten meat in ages. Guan Rua couldn't bear to watch and lowered her head, feeling tears welling up. Guan Ge had always been polite and well-mannered, and relatives often said to their children, "Look at how well-behaved Guan Ge is." Unlike this glutton Duan Wei in front of her. The Duan mother, who had been watching coldly the entire time, suddenly smiled. She fixed her gaze on Guan Rua and said to her mother, "Sister, your daughter is very beautiful. She must have a boyfriend by now, right?" Guan Rua felt a pang of unease and immediately sensed that something was wrong. She looked up and met the Duan mother's gaze. It was a scrutinizing, assessing look, as if she were evaluating goods. Seeing that the other woman was finally showing a friendly face, Guanrua's mother quickly responded, "Not at all. She's still single. As mothers, we both understand the worry, right? Whether it's the older one or the younger one, there's always something to worry about. Worrying is better than not being able to see them. My poor Gur, I never even got to meet him before he..." Duan's mother began to sob. Under the table, Guanrua saw her father kick her mother hard. She couldn't take it any longer and abruptly stood up. When she came out of the restroom and walked a few steps, she saw Duan Chong standing by the window in the hallway outside the private room, smoking, as if waiting for her. Guanrua lowered her head, pretending not to see him, but Duan Chong had already extinguished his cigarette and quickly walked over to her. His tall, imposing figure exuded an air of pressure, and the thick smell of cheap tobacco clung to him. Guanrua couldn't help but stop and hold her breath. "I'm sorry," Duan Chong said with an awkward smile, clumsily wringing his hands. "I didn't want to make our parents upset, so I waited here for you." "What do you want?" Guanrua frowned, glaring at him warily. "Can you?" Duan Chong took a deep breath. "Can you send me some photos of Guanga?" His voice became hoarse. "When my brother was alive, I never got to meet him." When Guanrua returned home, the first thing she did was grab half a dozen beers from the fridge and carry them to the living room window. She opened one can of beer and placed it across from her. Then, she opened a bag of chips and set it next to the beer. Chips were Guanji's favorite snack, but Guanrua used to forbid him from eating them, always playing the role of the adult, telling him they were junk food. But now, she no longer had the chance to nag him about these things. Guanga had his first drink right here. That day, he had received the acceptance letter from his dream university and was over the moon. The two siblings drank some beer. As soon as the alcohol hit, the usually quiet and reserved Guanga became quite talkative. He said he knew that all the money spent on his education over the years had come from Guanrua's salary. He said he knew his sister had never bought herself an expensive piece of clothing because she saved all her money for the family and for him. He said that after starting university, he would get a part-time job so that his sister wouldn't have to work so hard anymore. He also said that when he started working in the future, he would definitely repay her. Guanrua remembered playfully hitting Guanga on the head, telling him not to say such formal things. She warned him that if he didn't focus on his studies and ended up handing out flyers on the street, she'd find out and give him a good scolding. Looking back now, it felt like a prophecy. What normal siblings would thank each other in such a formal way. It was as if, deep down, he knew he wouldn't live to see that day, and that's why he spoke with such emotion. Wiping away her tears, Guanrua clinked her can of beer against the one across from her, choking out, "Little Go, here's to you. Your sister's drinking. You do what you want." Guanrua was 8 years older than Guanga and had taken care of him whenever their parents were busy. She remembered that Guanga had always been healthy, rarely catching colds or fevers. In middle school, he fell in love with basketball, and throughout high school and college, he was the star player on the school team with a much stronger physique than the average boy. But everything came out of nowhere. Not long after his 20th birthday, he had a high fever for a week straight. Unable to bear it anymore, he went to the hospital and was immediately sent to the ICU. It was then that their parents learned from the doctors that Guanga wasn't their biological son. After an investigation, it was discovered that the mix-up happened at the hospital where Guanga was born. He had been switched at birth. Her parents quietly told her about it, seeking her opinion. Guanrua was clear. Guanga was her brother, whom she had raised from a young age. How was that any different from having a biological brother? As long as there was a glimmer of hope, his illness had to be treated. Her parents nodded hesitantly, but from that point on, she sensed their growing indifference. They often left Guanga with her, making her run between the hospital and her job, while they would disappear for days at a time. When she asked where they were, they only said they were out raising money. They were indeed raising money, but as she later learned, they had also been busy searching for their biological son. And tonight, they were busy reuniting with him, not even mentioning Guan-ge, as if the son who had been a living presence for 20 years had never existed. Sniffling, Guan-ruo picked up her phone. She had saved many photos of Guan-ge and had spent countless tearful nights over the past 6 months staring at his pictures. Her eyes settled on Duan Chong's WeChat moments. There was a 9-grid photo post, all of them pictures of Guan-ge, accompanied by the words, "I never met you, but you are still my brother. If there is a next life, I hope I can truly be your brother." Tears welled up in Guan-ruo's eyes. With a slight movement of her finger, she gave the post a like. 2 minutes later, a message came in from Duan Chong. "If it's convenient, could you take me to visit him?" The two met at the cemetery in the suburbs. Guan-ruo led the way, with Duan Chong following behind, as they silently walked along the winding stone path. The sky was overcast, and a chilly wind blew, filling the air with a deep sense of sorrow. They stopped in front of Guan-ji's tombstone. His smiling face appeared before them. In the photo, Guan-ge had thick eyebrows and large eyes, much like Duan Chong. His features were well-defined, his gaze bright and lively, a vibrant young man who would naturally draw attention on the basketball court. Guan-ruo remembered how, when Guan-ge started university, she would often tease him with warnings. "You can date if you want, and your sister will even give you some dating money. But if you hurt any girl, I won't let you off." Guan-ge would then affectionately drape his arm around her shoulder, promising that someday he'd find a girlfriend as beautiful and gentle as his sister. Standing before the tombstone, Duan Chong bowed his head. His broad shoulders slumped, revealing a suppressed vulnerability. Guan-ruo stepped away, leaving the two brothers to spend some time alone. Half an hour later, Duan Chong found her under a tree. He sat down a short distance from her, knees drawn up, arms resting on them, gazing out at the vast expanse of tombstones beneath the gloomy sky. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, until Duan Chong finally spoke. "I'm glad that Guan-ge had such a wonderful sister like you," Duan Chong said, staring at the distant horizon. Guan-ruo let out a trembling sigh and gave a bitter smile. "You don't understand. Maybe he would blame me." Duan Chong turned his head to look at her. "Why?" As a cool breeze carried raindrops through the air, Guan-ruo lifted her hand to catch the rain, her expression filled with melancholy as she gazed up at the darkening sky. Her long hair was tousled by the wind. She reached out with slender fingers to tuck it behind her ear, her long eyelashes trembling slightly. Her fair cheeks glowed softly, and the tip of her delicate nose had a gentle sheen. She looked like someone straight out of a romantic drama. Duan Chong stared at her, momentarily lost in thought. Sensing his gaze, Guan-ruo stood up. "It's going to rain. We should go." Duan Chong's van was parked at the entrance to the cemetery. He glanced around but didn't see any other cars. How are you getting home?" he asked, puzzled. "I'll take the bus," Guan-ruo replied. She had never trusted her sense of direction enough to consider learning how to drive. She nodded slightly at Duan Chong before turning and walking along the roadside. The rain started to fall more heavily. She opened a purple umbrella and walked slowly, her long hair and white dress billowing in the wind, creating a scene that looked straight out of a movie. Duan Chong got into his van, watching her figure fade into the distance through the rain, deep in thought. After a couple of minutes, he rubbed his face vigorously. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside him. He quickly spread his arms and moved all the items on the passenger seat into the back of the van, dusted off the seat, and, not fully satisfied, wiped it down with a few tissues. He even sprayed some air freshener in the car before finally starting the engine. The van pulled up to the bus stop, and Duan Chong jumped out. Guan-ruo was sitting on a bench, holding a book. When she saw Duan Chong, she stood up, looking both confused and slightly wary. "I'll give you a ride," Duan Chong said. Guan-ruo glanced at her watch and shook her head lightly. "No need. The bus should be here soon." The rain had intensified, the street enveloped in a misty haze, empty and silent. "The rain's gotten heavier. The bus is probably stuck somewhere," Come on, I'll take you. It's not safe for you to be out here alone. Without waiting for her reply, Duan Chong walked back to the van, opened the passenger door, and got inside, starting the engine. The van's engine sputtered as it idled, urging Guan Rua to make a decision. She finally got into the van. The next moment, the rain poured down in torrents. Large drops hammered against the windows, so forceful they seemed like they might break the glass. The windshield wipers squeaked and groaned under the strain, barely managing to clear the view, leaving visibility down to just 10 meters ahead. It was as if the whole world was filled with the sound of wind and rain, isolating them from everything outside, trapping them in the car. Duan Chong drove slowly. 2 hours later, they finally arrived at the entrance of Guan Rua's apartment building. By then, the wind had died down, the rain had stopped, and the sun was shining brightly, as if the world had returned to its normal rhythm. Guan Rua placed her hand on the car door handle but hesitated, feeling it would be impolite to just leave like this. She quickly glanced at Duan Chong and said, "Thank you." Duan Chong stared ahead at the street, his expression tense as if he were making a difficult decision. After a moment, he spoke, "I'll convince my mom to send Dawei back to your home after this summer." Guan Rua nodded thoughtfully. In truth, she didn't care when Duan Wei would return home. At least for now, that chubby boy who only knew how to play video games did nothing to awaken any sense of sibling affection in her. But Duan Chong's expression moved her. She could sense how difficult this decision was for him. After all, he had been Duan Wei's brother for 20 years. For that bit of honesty alone, she felt she owed him a response. Guan Rua withdrew her hand from the car door and sat back down. After a long pause, she said softly, "When you have time, I'll slowly tell you Guan Ji's story." Duan Chong turned to look at her, his eyes slightly reddened. His voice was hoarse as he responded, "Okay." They sat in silence for a while longer. Then, Guan Rua pushed open the car door. "Goodbye," she said. The car was left with the lingering scent of her shampoo and an indescribable, gentle fragrance. Duan Chong sat there dazed for a long time before finally driving away. After starting work, Guan Rua moved out of her family home and rented an apartment near the publishing house where she was employed. She was busy with work at that time, so she only returned home one day each weekend, which coincided with Guan Ji's school breaks. The siblings often went out together. She would take Guan Ge to eat good food, buy books, and shop for clothes. After Guan Ge passed away, Guan Rua rarely returned home. She couldn't forget what her parents had done, and she couldn't forgive them. If it weren't for them, perhaps Guan Ge would still be alive, and there might have been a chance for a bone marrow transplant from the Duan family. One day, Guan Rua received a call from her mother, asking her to come home for dinner that evening. Though reluctant, Guan Rua still took a taxi home after work. As soon as she walked in, she saw 2 cardboard boxes in the hallway, filled with Guan Ji's old clothes and books. A rush of anger surged through her. Guan's mother came out to greet her and pulled her into Guan Ji's bedroom. Guan's father was also in the room, adjusting the position of the bedside table. The room had changed dramatically. Everything had been replaced. The desk and bookshelves had been rearranged, as if they were trying to avoid any bad luck. All traces of Guan Ji's existence had been completely erased. Guan Rua could hardly recognize her own voice as she spoke. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing?" Guan's father rolled his eyes at her. "Can't you see? We're setting up your brother's room." He looked at his daughter closely and his voice grew cold. "Why do you look so sullen? Are you not wanting your brother to come back?" Guan Rua didn't respond and coldly turned around, walking out of the room. Guan's mother gave her husband a light slap. "What's wrong with you two? Every time you meet, it's a confrontation." She muttered as she followed her daughter into the living room. "Xiao Rua, I don't think the Duan family plans to send Xiao Wei back anytime soon. What do you think we should do? Do they have other conditions? We've already given his foster mother 4 or 5,000 yuan in bits and pieces. What more does she want?" Guan's mother anxiously twisted her hands. Guan Rua replied flatly, "Just wait a little longer." Duan Chong said they'd send him back after the summer. After the summer? Guan's mother glanced worriedly at her husband, who had followed them out. That's over a month away. What if something goes wrong during that time? Guan Ruo sighed. It's understandable. After all, they've raised him for 20 years. So, what if it's been 20 years? Guan's father suddenly interrupted angrily. We raised Guanga for 20 years too, didn't we? We fed him, sent him to college, and in the end, we spent nearly all our savings treating his illness. Have you ever thought about how we feel, being old and childless? He sighed deeply, looking at his wife, full of grievance and bitterness. You see, this is what happens when you raise a daughter. She's not even married yet, but she's already taking the side of outsiders. Who knows what'll happen after she marries? Guan Ruo sneered. I'd love to get married, but with what money? Where did the money I've earned all these years go? If others don't know, you do. Guan's father's voice rose. I raised you all these years. What's wrong with using a little of your money? Besides, who insisted on the treatment back then? Now look, the money's gone. And so is the person. Wasn't that your idea? Guan Ruo screamed. If it weren't for your selfishness. If Xiao Ge hadn't known about your little schemes, he wouldn't have done it. He wouldn't have died. Smack. Guan's father slapped Guan Ruo hard. He shouted, Who taught you to speak to your father like that? Trembling with rage, Guan Ruo held back her tears and walked toward the door, but in the hallway, she couldn't move. Guan Ji's short life was packed into those 2 cardboard boxes. Staring at them, tears streamed down her face like rain. Duan Chong was stacking goods in the supermarket warehouse with his coworkers when his phone rang. Guan Ruo's voice came through with a nasal tone, and he didn't recognize her at first. Guan Ruo said, I have some of Xiao Ji's things here. If it's convenient, I'll bring them to you. Convenient, convenient. Duan Chan quickly replied. Or maybe I could come by and pick them up after work? But Guan Ruo insisted on bringing them over, so Duan Chong gave her the address of the supermarket where he worked. After hanging up, he glanced at his sweat-soaked work uniform and panicked a bit. He hurriedly asked his supervisor for leave, rushed to the restroom to quickly wash up, and when he came out, he had changed into a clean t-shirt and pants, even shaving his stubble. His coworkers teased him. Hey, Duan Chong, who are you meeting? Going on a date, huh? Duan Chong touched his face, smiling without answering. As soon as Guan Ruo stepped out of the taxi, Duan Chong noticed the finger marks on her face and her swollen eyes. He was stunned for a moment. When Guan Ruo opened the trunk, he quickly walked over. I'll do it. He took 2 steps forward, stacking the 2 cardboard boxes on top of each other and holding them in his strong arms as he carried them toward his van. This box contains Xiao Ji's books and college entrance exam review materials. Guan Ruo reached out and touched a workbook. The paper, worn soft from frequent use, now carried the imprints of Xiao Ge. That familiar softness carried the imprint of Guan Ge, and Guan Ruo could almost see him bent over, working on his studies. Her nose tingled, and she stood there, lost in thought. Duan Chong scratched his head and, after a long silence, mustered the courage to say, You probably haven't eaten yet, right? How about we grab a bite together? Guan Ruo lightly sniffled and nodded slightly. The back street of the supermarket was a bustling food street. As the night fell, the place became lively and noisy. Duan Chong led Guan Ruo to a small eatery he knew well. The shop was simple and unpretentious, a typical hole in the wall. Most of the diners were drivers and day laborers, sitting shirtless in the summer heat, sweating profusely over large bowls of noodles. In a place like this, Guan Ruo was an oddity. Her tall figure, delicate features, intellectual attire, and graceful demeanor caught the eyes of those around her, who couldn't help but look again and again. But when they saw Duan Chong beside her, their faces turned puzzled. Duan Chong was clearly one of them, and standing next to Guan Ruo, the only comparison that came to mind was that of a toad and a swan. But Guan Ruo was lost in her own thoughts, completely oblivious. She sipped her beer in small sips, indifferent to the teasing glances from those around her. It was Duan Chong who felt incredibly uncomfortable. Normally, he could slurp down a bowl of noodles in a few gulps, but now he forced himself to eat slowly and neatly, feeling extremely out of place. He even began to regret inviting Guan Rua to dinner. "Brother Chong, you're here too?" 3 girls walked in with their lunch boxes, giggling. The cute, slightly chubby one walked over to Duan Chong's table. Xiaoli, you're here too," Duan Chong said. Guan Rua looked up and met Xiaoli's inquisitive gaze. During the whole time they waited for their food, she could feel Xiaoli's eyes on her. After 2 bottles of beer, Guan Rua started to feel better. The faint flush on her cheeks slightly concealed the mark of the slap. When the 2 of them left the eatery, Duan Chong instinctively reached for his car keys. Guan Rua looked at Duan Chong and asked, "Can you walk with me for a bit?" This was the first time she had spoken since they entered the eatery. Under the influence of alcohol, her eyes were bright, sparkling with a vibrant light. In the night, they seemed particularly lively. There were still 2 more deliveries to make that night, but Duan Chong quietly slipped his car keys back into his pocket. Guan Rua seemed to have a kind of magic over him. He couldn't bear to and didn't want to refuse her. The night breeze was gentle, rustling the leaves. The 2 of them walked silently under the shadows of the plane trees. Guan Rua had her hands clasped behind her back, her posture straight as a board. She held her head slightly high, deeply inhaling the faint floral scent carried by the breeze. The wind softly played with her long hair and dress, and the sight of her like that made Duan Chong's heart warm. A question floated into Duan Chong's mind. How could such a gentle and beautiful girl not have a boyfriend? What were the men who were worthy of her doing? "Have you always been so quiet?" Guan Rua turned to face him, walking backward with her hands still behind her back. She squinted her eyes as she scrutinized him, her gaze curling down slightly, revealing a hint of an adorable expression she probably didn't even realize she had. Duan Chong touched his chin, thinking about how to respond, but the words had already slipped out. It's a habit," he said, his tone carrying a touch of helplessness. Guan Rua continued to study him. "What did you do for work before?" "I was a long-haul truck driver for several years." "Oh, I see," Guan Rua said with a look of realization. "See what?" Duan Chong was a bit puzzled. Then Guan Rua explained. "Being a long-haul truck driver is a very lonely job," she said, turning around and slowly walking ahead, her back to Duan Chong. Duan Chong stopped in his tracks. The narrow, stuffy truck cab, the glaring sunlight on the highway, the seemingly endless nights. The solitary days and nights he spent in the truck over those years flickered through his mind. He had always thought that he just happened to have a quiet nature. But now, in the shadow of the plane trees on this summer night, it dawned on him that his silence was born from years of loneliness. A rustling sound echoed in his mind. Suddenly, he felt like talking. Guan Rua also stopped, turning her head to look at him. He walked over, reached out, and plucked a gardenia branch that had extended through the iron fence on his right, twirling it between his fingers. Duan Chong said, "When Awe was 5, my dad ran off with a younger woman and never came back." Guan Rua asked softly, "And then?" "My mom raised the 2 of us on her own. Life was really hard. I dropped out after middle school and started doing odd jobs. Once I was old enough, I got my driver's license and drove long-haul trucks for several years. That was until a year ago when my mom was in a car accident and couldn't move around easily. I switched jobs to take care of the family." Guan Rua looked at the gardenia in Duan Chong's hand. "So, you've been supporting Awe's education all this time?" Duan Chong gave a bitter smile. "But I'm not as good a brother as you are a sister. I was on the road all the time, hardly ever home. My mom wasn't in great health for years, so she didn't really keep an eye on Awe. As a result, Awe picked up a lot of bad habits. He repeated his senior year twice and still didn't pass." Guan Rua took the gardenia from him and inhaled its scent deeply. "You're a good brother," she said, looking at Duan Chong, her gaze now warmer than before. Duan Chong returned home close to 11 o'clock. Duan Wei was already asleep. After washing up, he knocked on his mother's door. The bedroom was dark, and in the shadows, the figure in the wheelchair was hunched into a dark, indistinct shape. Duan Chong turned on the light and asked, "Mom, why are you still awake?" His mother was holding a photo of Guango in her arms, a picture Duan Chong had specially developed for her some time ago. She looked up at her son, her gaze blank, her eye sockets sunken and dry, like a drought-stricken desert, unable to shed any more tears. Duan Chong was stunned for a moment. Ever since the day they heard the news of Guan Ji's death, his mother had never shown any sadness in front of him. In fact, to this day, she had stubbornly refused to visit his grave. It seemed that only complete and utter isolation could prevent her emotional defenses from collapsing. But she clearly hadn't succeeded entirely. She was still in the dark, holding the photo of her son, her biological son whom she had never met. Duan Chong squatted beside his mother's knees, carefully reaching for the photo. "Mom, it's time to sleep." His mother snapped out of her daze. She tapped her son on the head. "Why are you home so late? I'll heat up some food for you." "Mom, I've already eaten." His mother replied with an, "Oh," watching as Duan Chong took the photo of Guango and placed it on the bedside table. She studied the child in the photo again, murmuring, "Ah, Chong, do you think your mom is heartless for not visiting Xiaoge all this time?" Duan Chong held his mother's hand, sincerely comforting her. "Mom, I understand how you feel. There's no rush. We can take our time." His mother sighed deeply. "I only have you now." Duan Chong squatted in front of her again. "Mom, Aoi will still come back to see you, and I've met Guan Ruo a few times. She's a very sensible girl. I believe her parents." His mother interrupted. "You've met that Guan family girl?" Duan Chong felt his mother's intense gaze and quickly said, Yes, I've met her twice. We just talked about Aoi." His mother looked at her son's spirited face. What she remembered most vividly about this son who started earning money to support the family at 15 was the weariness etched on his face. But it seemed that at some point, the tiredness on his face had lessened, and his eyes had become much clearer. When did it start? His mother remembered. It started from that family reunion when he first saw Guan Ruo. Duan Chong felt a bit guilty under his mother's gaze. He stood up and moved behind her. "Mom, let me give you a massage." His mother grabbed his hand. "No need, you rest. Mom has something to ask you." Duan Chong had no choice but to sit on the edge of the bed next to her wheelchair. His mother stared at his face. "Son, do you have feelings for that Guan family girl?" "Mom, what are you saying?" Duan Chong muttered in mock annoyance. "Don't lie to me. You can't hide your feelings from me. I've known for a while. But what about that girl? Does she have feelings for you?" Duan Chong smiled self-deprecatingly. "She's a graduate student and works at a publishing house. She's educated and cultured. How could she be interested in someone like me?" After saying this, Duan Chong froze. He had never considered this before, but in that moment of unintentional realization, he understood that it wasn't that he hadn't thought about it. He just hadn't dared to. Now, comparing the two of them, the gap between them felt like a sharp, glaring knife, brutally separating them. This reality deeply shook him. Duan Chong's shoulders slumped, and he touched his face, suddenly feeling ridiculous. His mother pursed her lips. What's the big deal about being educated? When it comes to marriage, it's all about the everyday basics. You couldn't finish your education because that good-for-nothing father of yours ruined our family. If we'd been better off back then with your abilities, you wouldn't be any worse than her. Duan Chong felt frustrated and didn't want to continue this conversation. He stood up. "Mom, I'm really tired and need to sleep. If you need anything during the night, just call me." After saying this, he turned and walked out. His mother called after him. "Ah, Chong, when do you have a day off? Come with me to the Guan family." Duan Chong turned around, looking wary. "Mom, what are you planning to do?" His mother smiled bitterly. "Aoi has the Guan family name. Sooner or later, he'll be sent back to them." But there are some things that need to be discussed openly. When his mother said this, no, long before that, on the day of the family reunion, a vague idea had already formed in her mind. But now, that idea had taken root. After being abandoned by her husband, his mother's spirit had been broken, and she spent her days soaked in medicine, leaving the responsibility of supporting the family to Duan Chong. She had always felt a deep sense of guilt toward her eldest son. Now, the only way she could think of to make it up to him was to help him fulfill his wish. After a series of knocks on the door, Duan Chong stood with his mother at the Guan family's doorstep. He swallowed deeply, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down, his heart pounding heavily in his chest, and his palms sweating. His mother shot him an amused glance as if saying, "Look at you, such a nervous wreck." Duan Chong, embarrassed, lowered his head, but his heartbeat grew even more frantic. The door opened, and Mr. and Mrs. Guan greeted them at the entrance. They craned their necks to look behind Duan Chong, but when they didn't see Duan Wei, their faces showed obvious disappointment. Mrs. Duan said, "I had always stay at home to study." The Guans quickly forced smiles. Yes, studying is the most important. The group entered the living room, and Duan Chong attentively listened to the sounds coming from the kitchen. Sure enough, after a moment, Guan Rua came out with a fruit platter. Her long hair was tied up in a high ponytail, making her neck appear even longer and wider. She wore a simple old dress with an apron over it, the apron's ties accentuating her slender waist. Duan Chong felt a warm current flowing through his chest. In his imagination, Guan Rua's homey appearance was exactly like this, elegant, neat, and gentle. "Mom, have some fruit," Guan Rua said, inviting Mrs. Duan while deliberately avoiding her scrutinizing gaze. However, when facing Duan Chong, she suddenly felt awkward in front of the elders. She gave a brief nod and hurried back to the kitchen. Duan Chong sat there dazed, feeling disoriented. Since his mother had revealed his feelings a few days ago, he had been restless. There were several mistakes with the shipments, and he had even had some of his wages docked by the team leader. He often rolled between immense joy and deep disappointment, tormented by fire and ice. Every day, he woke up thinking about contacting Guan Rua, but by the time he lay in bed at night, he had done nothing. He was constantly strung taut by a thread of awareness, knowing he wasn't worthy of Guan Rua. Extreme self-doubt and extreme pride kept him maintaining his dignity and self-respect as a man. "Miss Brother Guan, the reason we are here today is to discuss Ah Wei's situation. After all, he's called me mom for 20 years, and we've been mother and son for 20 years. It's not easy for me to get over this hurdle." Mrs. Duan said bluntly. Yes, Mrs. Guan responded with genuine sympathy. "I completely understand how you feel. It must be very, very difficult for a mother. Mr. Guan and I have also discussed it. As long as Ah Wei is willing, he can visit you any time in the future, and he will definitely support you in your old age." Mrs. Duan sneered inwardly. "You're willing to promise anything to get your son back now, aren't you? But who knows what the future holds? It's better to be direct and straightforward. I can't expect Ah Wei to support me in my old age, nor have I ever thought that way," Mrs. Duan said with a hint of sarcasm. "I've raised Ah Wei for 20 years, and that's enough." The Guans exchanged wary glances, sensing from Mrs. Duan's expression that she had deeper plans. "I'm here today mainly for one thing," Mrs. Duan said, looking towards the kitchen. "My son, Duan Chong, is still single, and your daughter doesn't have a boyfriend either. In my opinion, why not let them be together? Miss Brother Guan, what do you think?" The Guans were dumbfounded. Duan Chong shouted, "Mom, what are you talking about?" Mrs. Duan sharply scolded, "Be quiet. You don't have a say here." Duan Chong turned and saw Guan Rua standing at the kitchen door, her face pale, her hands hanging at her sides, slightly clenched. The room fell silent. In the oppressive silence that followed, everyone immediately understood Mrs. Duan's scheme. She had raised Duan Wei for 20 years, and he was still alive and healthy, unlike Guange, who is now just a meaningless name. The Duan family's debt to the Guan family was impossible to repay, no matter how they tried. But there was one way to balance the scales, to clear all debts, whether monetary or emotional, in one stroke. That way was to have Guan Ruo become Duan Chang's wife, to become her daughter-in-law. In other words, having Guan Ruo replace Guan Ge to repay the debt of the Guan family. From the first time Mrs. Duan saw Guan Ruo, this idea had quietly settled in her mind. When she confirmed that Duan Chang was interested in Guan Ruo, she was overjoyed. What better way to both make up for the loss of her younger son and help her eldest son fulfill his wish? Moreover, she knew the Guan family would not refuse. They had never cared much for Guan Ruo. More importantly, even if they wanted to refuse, they wouldn't dare. Mrs. Duan cleared her throat, breaking the cold silence in the room. Sister, Brother Guan, a few months ago when you came to my house with the death certificate of my biological son, as a mother, the first thing that came to my mind was to find out the real cause of my son's death. I wanted to understand what my son, whom I had never met, went through before leaving this world. The Guan couple exchanged fearful glances, seeing the terror in each other's faces. Mrs. Duan's voice suddenly grew sharp and urgent, cutting like a knife. You showed me my son's death certificate, stating that he died of leukemia. True, he had leukemia, but he did not die from it. He committed suicide by jumping from a hospital window. The Guans lowered their heads, making no attempt at defense, like criminals awaiting judgment. Duan Chang was deeply shocked by this cruel truth. He stared wide-eyed, standing still for a while, before slowly and mechanically turning his gaze towards Guan Ruo. Guan Ruo remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the ground, her expression resigned as if she had already been sentenced and had given up any struggle. Mrs. Duan's voice softened, taking on a cold, factual tone. You're afraid I'll pursue this, afraid it will be hard to explain later, so you had someone cover it up and falsify the death certificate for my son. Guan Ruo. She looked at Guan Ruo. You're educated. Tell me, if this were reported, what would be the legal consequence for falsifying a death certificate? At the very least, it should be detention, right? And look at your father's age. I understand what you're saying. Guan Ruo stepped forward, looking coldly at Mrs. Duan. You don't need to say more. I will give you an answer. At 10:30 in the evening, Duan Chang finished work and walked towards the van, pulling out his car keys. Duan Chang, I need to talk to you, Guan Ruo said, emerging from the shadows nearby. Duan Chang's back stiffened. In recent days, Guan Ruo had been messaging him daily, asking to meet, but he had not responded. Guan Ji's death by suicide had never been mentioned by Guan Ruo. The truth about Guan Ji's death and Guan Ruo's deliberate concealment of it clashed violently in his mind. On one side was his younger brother, and on the other was the woman he loved. He was tortured by intense conflicting emotions, as if he had lost all sense. Why haven't you replied to my messages? Guan Ruo asked, taking a few steps forward and standing behind him, the night breeze carrying her faint fragrance to his nose. Duan Chang's heart could not remain completely cold. After a moment of silence, he softly asked, Why did you hide this from me? If you want to know why, give me half an hour and I'll explain, Guan Ruo replied. Duan Chang fumbled with the car keys, indecisive. Guan Ruo's slender, cool hand touched his warm arm, and she said gently, Come to my place. Duan Chang turned abruptly and looked at Guan Ruo. Guan Ruo pinched his arm lightly. Let's go. You know where I live. When they finally stood in the small living room of Guan Ruo's home, facing the wall of books, Duan Chang's head was still buzzing. He couldn't even comprehend what mindset he had when he followed Guan Ruo home. Anticipation, resistance, confusion, and bewilderment. None of these words could precisely capture his current feelings. Guan Ruo emerged with a six-pack of beer. She pointed to the area near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Xiaoge used to sit there often. Duan Chang looked at the empty cushion, hesitated for a moment, and then walked over and sat down. Guan Rua poured beer into the cup in front of Duan Chong, then finished a can of beer in one go. A cold burp echoed in her throat, finally breaking free, and it sounded like a sigh. Duan Chong stared at her in astonishment. "Drink slowly." Guan Rua ignored his concern and forced a bitter smile. "After Xiao Ge passed away, my relationship with my parents became very strained. I still can't forgive them." Duan Chong tensed up, listening to her words. Although reluctant, the Guan family had not given up on Xiao Ji's treatment. After 20 years together, there was still some emotional connection. But as the treatment costs gradually rose and a suitable bone marrow match was delayed, and with no one to help share the heavy burden, cracks began to appear between the couple. They frequently argued about money and whether to continue the treatment, even fighting verbally in Xiao Ji's hospital room. Soon, Xiao Ge noticed his parents' anger and estrangement. He had been very sensitive after falling ill, feeling like he was a great burden to his family. From their arguments, he vaguely guessed his own background. He became increasingly silent, often staring blankly at the ceiling. Guan Rua had always thought it was a reaction to the medication. The last time, Guan Rua's parents, as usual, briefly greeted her before disappearing. Guan Rua continued to juggle between work and the hospital. One day, Xiao Ge suddenly asked for chicken soup. Guan Rua took a half day off, chose a free-range chicken at the market, and made soup while working from home. When she was ladling the soup, she was distracted by work and spilled it, burning her arm, which turned red. Guan Rua applied ointment, and when she went to the hospital, she deliberately wore a long-sleeve t-shirt, but Xiao Ge still noticed. "Sis, I'm causing you trouble," the emaciated Xiao Ge said weakly with a smile. Guan Rua teased him. "You're getting more pretentious with your words." Xiao Ge looked at the burn. "What happened to your arm?" "Oh, it's nothing. Just clumsy," Guan Rua said quickly, pulling down her sleeve to cover the burn. She scooped a spoonful of soup, blew on it to cool it, and brought it to Xiao Ji's lips. Xiao Ge drank the soup obediently, looking at his sister with satisfaction. Suddenly, he asked, "Sis, are Mom and Dad out looking for their biological child?" Guan Rua's hand shook, spilling some of the soup. She quickly adjusted her expression and gently patted Xiao Ji's head. "Don't talk nonsense." She again offered the spoonful of soup to Xiao Ge. "Here, drink up." But her eyes avoided his penetrating gaze. Xiao Ge smiled and finished the whole bowl of soup as instructed. Later, Guan Rua reflected that her reaction must have confirmed Xiao Ji's suspicion. She pretended to be calm but had offered no explanation for Xiao Ji's question. This meant that Xiao Ge knew he had guessed correctly. That night, Guan Rua was so exhausted that she slept heavily on the rented chair in the hospital room until she was abruptly awakened by the hospital's noise in the middle of the night. Guan Ge had jumped from the building. "This is how it happened," Guan Rua said, wiping her tears and sobbing quietly. Duan Chong got up and stood on the balcony, smoking furiously. His chest was swelling with fierce sorrow, suffocating him and making it hard for him to breathe. He knew that Guan Ge must have made this decision after learning the truth about his origins, unwilling to burden the Guan family or his beloved sister any longer. A pair of arms wrapped around his waist from behind. Duan Chong flinched and turned around in panic. Guan Rua's moist lips were already pressed against his, kissing him. She wrapped her arms from his waist around his neck, standing on tiptoe and hugging his head with a sense of self-destructive despair. Duan Chong's mother had been very clear about her position. Did Guan Rua still have a choice? Could she watch her father be detained or even imprisoned? Like fireworks soaring into the daylight sun, Duan Chong's mind went blank with dazzling emptiness, but his body was burning with intense heat. Instinctively, he responded passionately, holding her soft body tightly. The two of them swayed and retreated into the room, until Duan Chong stepped on an empty beer can, causing him to stumble, and they both fell onto the sofa. In that moment, consciousness abruptly returned to him. He sprang up, stumbling back until the back of his head hit the wall with a thud. Pressing his entire back against the hard wall, He forced himself to wake up through the pain of the pressure. "Guanrua, what are you doing?" he finally managed to say. Guanrua smiled, a heartbreaking, sorrowful smile. Then she walked towards him, looking at him fervently. "Duan Chong, even though this is a transaction, I am willing. Really, you are a good person." Her lips moved closer again. Duan Chong cradled Guanrua's head with both hands. Her small head was encircled in his large hands, like a pitiful walnut. "Guanrua, look at me." Duan Chong forced her to meet his gaze. Guanrua's teary eyes fixed on Duan Chong. "I like you." Duan Chong gasped as if his throat was being squeezed, speaking with immense difficulty. "I like you very, very much, but I can't." "Can't what?" "You'll regret it." "I won't." "Even if you won't, it's still not right." Duan Chong suddenly roared with agitation. "You're a person, not something to be used as a trade. This is so unfair to you." Tears streamed down Guanrua's face. She wasn't crying over her own grievances. She was crying because there was someone in this world who truly cared about her, someone who cared whether she was treated fairly. A week later, Duan Wei returned to the Guan family. His initial resistance and discomfort gradually disappeared under the meticulous care of his biological parents and the frequent visits from Duan Chong. He adapted to his new role and began to enjoy being cared for as the son of both families. Guanrua visited home less frequently. She learned about the family affairs from her mother's apologetic phone calls. Old Guan was working hard to cultivate healthy eating habits in Duanwei, taking him out for runs every day. To motivate him, he even got him a new phone, though the rule was that he could only play games for 1 hour a day. He also enrolled him in numerous after-school classes, picking him up early and dropping him off late, trying to pull up his dismal grades. Every week, Duan Chong would come to see Duan Wei, monitoring his progress with his weight loss and studies. Duan Wei feared this brother the most. Whenever Duan Chong scolded him, he would remain silent. As for Duan Chong's mother, she was never mentioned by Duan Chong. The matter she had previously shouted about was never brought up again. At first, Guanrua's parents were still nervous, constantly fearing that the sword hanging over them might drop at any moment. Slowly, they saw Duan Chong's sincerity and finally believed that the matter was over. "Xiao Roa, your mother has always wanted to ask if there's anything between you and Duan Chong. Every time I bring you up in front of him, he quickly changes the subject," Guan's mother said. Guanrua stiffly replied, "There's nothing between us." Guan's mother sighed deeply. "To be honest, I quite like that kid. He's honest and reliable. Maybe it's just not meant to be for you too." After hanging up, Guanrua stared out of the window in a daze. She knew in her heart that she liked Duan Chong, otherwise she wouldn't have been so reluctant. But she also understood that Duan Chong was right. Marriage should be built on an equal foundation. But they didn't have that foundation. The transaction proposed by Duan's mother would be a lurking beast, capable of tearing their love apart at the slightest disturbance throughout their long life together. Guanrua often thought back to the day they returned from the cemetery, trapped in the car amidst the storm and wind. Yes, they were trapped because of Guanga. No one dared to move forward. No one dared to boldly declare their courage to bear the consequences alone. So the only release could be to turn and leave. After some time, Guan's mother called Guanrua again, saying that Duan Chong had a girlfriend now, and they had come together to see Duan Wei. Guan's mother spoke of this with a tone of relief, as if she had finally freed herself from a bit of guilt towards her daughter. Guanrua opened Duan Chong's Moments page. Since the post with Guan Ji's photos, he hadn't updated anything else. She opened the chat window, wanting to say something, but after staring at the screen for a long time, she gave up. She realized Duan Chong's intention. By bringing his girlfriend to her home, he wanted to completely reassure her parents and her. She and her parents were safe now. Guanrua knew they would no longer meet alone, but Guanrua suddenly remembered that in the midst of all the chaos, she hadn't properly shared Guan Ji's story with him. Guanrua turned to her computer, opened a document, and instinctively typed a few words. the story of my younger brother. Thoughts flowed like a spring, continuously pouring out. 6 months later, Guan Ruo received an invitation from Duan Chang. The bride was Shaoli, the girl Guan Ruo had once met at the snack bar. She wasn't surprised at all. At the wedding banquet, Guan Ruo's family was seated as guests of honor, alongside the Duan family at the main table. Duan Chang's thoughtful gesture made Guan Ruo feel deeply melancholy. Duan's mother sat directly opposite Guan Ruo, her eyes fixed on her with a mix of hostility and deep loathing. Guan Ruo could understand the hostility. She could imagine the immense pressure Duan Chang felt facing his capricious and obsessive mother. Ultimately, Duan Chang had gone against her wishes and stood with her family. This betrayal, Duan's mother had placed squarely on her. But the source of this deep loathing puzzled Guan Ruo. Now, we invite the parents of the bride and groom to come on stage. The wedding host's voice rang out across the hall. Duan's mother was pushed onto the stage by relatives. As she passed by Guan Ruo, she suddenly grabbed Guan Ruo's arm and leaned in close. "I'm so glad that Ah Chang didn't marry you," Duan's mother hissed through clenched teeth, giving her a venomous look. Guan Ruo suddenly understood the source of her loathing. Duan Chang loved her, but for her sake, he suppressed his feelings and let her go. This deep and sincere affection evoked jealousy and disdain in Duan's mother. Over the years, as a dutiful and obedient eldest son, Duan Chang had supported his family and adhered to his mother's every demand. But with Guan Ruo, he not only stood against her, but also painfully gave up his own love. From this sacrifice, Duan's mother realized the depth of her son's feelings for Guan Ruo. This was a profound and expansive love she had never experienced in her life. It filled her with deep jealousy and hatred towards Guan Ruo. Recalling Duan's mother's malicious gaze earlier, Guan Ruo took a deep breath. Indeed, Duan Chang understood his mother. If they had stayed together, who knew what kind of trouble jealousy might have brought from Duan's mother? Duan Chang and his bride came over to toast. Guan Ruo, along with the others at her table, stood up. Their eyes met, and in his gaze, she saw a farewell. From now on, in this lifetime, they could only be friends. Duan Wei finally got accepted into university. Although it was only a third-tier institution, it brought immense joy to both families. Duan Chang had arranged a celebratory banquet. As he spoke with his glass in hand, Guan Ruo noticed he now had a slight paunch. His face carried the contented look of a married man. After the meal, Guan Ruo invited him for a walk. The last time they had been alone together was in Guan Ruo's home. Thinking back on that passionate kiss now felt like a distant memory. As they walked in silence, Guan Ruo pulled out a book from her bag, still faintly smelling of ink and oil. She handed it to him and said, "This is for you." Duan Chang looked at the title of the book, The Story of My Brother. "I never had the chance to tell you Guan Ji's story properly, so I wrote it down," Guan Ruo said, smiling through her tears. "Guan Ruo," Duan Chang choked up. "I should go now." Guan Ruo forced a smile. They shouldn't discuss Guan Ge face-to-face anymore. It only brought back painful memories. "Guan Ruo," Duan Chang called after her. Guan Ruo stopped. "Do you know the real reason why I rejected you back then?" Guan Ruo turned to face him. "I said it wasn't fair to you, but..." Duan Chang took a deep breath. "That wasn't the real reason." Guan Ruo looked at him. "What was the real reason?" "I'm just a selfish, ordinary man, uneducated, working with my hands. Facing someone as outstanding as you, I felt immense pressure. Deep down, I didn't want to spend my whole life under that kind of pressure." Guan Ruo gave a bitter smile. "Are you saying this to push me to find someone who deserves me and move on?" "No, I'm being honest." Tears streamed down Guan Ruo's face. "You're not ordinary or selfish. You gave me the most abundant and passionate love I've ever felt." Guan Ruo turned and walked away. Duan Chang stood alone in the night. After a long time, he touched his face and realized he was crying. A few days later, when Duan Chang came home from work, he saw his mother sitting in a daze, a copy of the story of my brother beside her. Her hollow eyes were red and swollen. Even though she thought she would never cry again, she still did.